You know, my grandfather always said that ignorance is curable, but stupidity is forever. He basically meant that being ignorant was okay because you were just uninformed or misinformed. However, if you blindly refuse to hear the facts, that just makes you stupid. So let's break down a topic that is massively controversial, but the left has continued to wittingly or unwittingly misrepresent the actual facts in the Jean Carroll case against Trump. So let's lay out the actual evidence against Trump in this case, but first I want you to close your eyes and pretend the case isn't against Trump, but it's against your male spouse, brother, or a male loved one. In this exercise you can't use, but Donald Trump is different, or we know what he meant, because the case still has to be factual in order for Trump to be found guilty of something. On June 21, 2019, Jean Carrol published an article in New York Magazine titled Hideous Men, stating that Donald Trump had sexually assaulted her in late 1995 or early 1996 in the Bergdorf Goodman department store in New York City. Now, it's important to note that in this article she couldn't recall the alleged event's actual year. This conveniently made it impossible for Donald Trump to provide an alibi for this crime or provide his whereabouts that are almost always accounted for throughout the day on his schedule. Under normal circumstances, this alone would have stopped most trials of this nature to continue if you couldn't even declare the day or time of day, let alone the year. But Trump said the woman is crazy and she isn't my type. It might be easier to break down the evidence by telling you up front there really was no evidence at all other than hearsay from her three BFFs stating they heard Jean Carroll tell them Trump did it, but even they couldn't recall the year or the exact month for sure. After Jean Carroll wrote the book, one of the famous allegations was she said she was wearing a blue Donna Karan blazer dress that she got in 1994, but the only problem with that allegation was that dress was never made in 1994. She also claimed that same dress was the one she wore when Trump attacked her, and he left a stain of his body fluid on that infamous dress. Jean Carroll's legal team insisted that Donald Trump give up his DNA, but they were trying to take custody of the DNA without absolutely any controls from the Trump legal team. The Trump team rightfully denied the request because there was no way Trump was going to allow unfettered access to his DNA. Finally, as the deadline approached, Trump's team said if the DNA was discovered not to be Trump's, the case must be dismissed. This is where the story strangely took a twist. Judge Kaplan stated on record that even if the stain was not Trump's, it still didn't mean he didn't rape or sexually assault her. Wow. Imagine anyone not being exonerated by the DNA not matching in a rape case, especially when the claimant alleged it was the attacker's DNA. This is another reason why the years and dates changed, because 1 minute it could have been 94, but the instant it was exposed that the dress wasn't made in 94, Jean Carroll not only went as far as saying 95, but she also thought it could have been sometime in 1996. And how about this bizarre stuff? She never came forward with these allegations over the years, despite constantly being open about sexuality, posting things that were very sexual in nature on social media, many of which Trump has shared. They include remarks such as, "How do you know your unwanted sexual advance is unwanted until you advance it?" and "Sex tip I learned from my dog. When in heat, chase the male until he collapses with exhaustion, then jump him." So when I say there was no evidence, there really was no evidence, with the exception of the three BFFs' hearsay saying she told them it happened, and the famous TMZ tape of Trump speaking to Billy Bush in an interview, an event that happened years later, and that offered no evidence to the Jean Carroll defamation case. In most cases, the videotape wouldn't have been allowed as evidence in a case since it really didn't support claim to her assault, but it most definitely would set the prejudicial tone of a jury. Before I go any further, you really need to revisit the TMZ Billy Bush tape, because even though it sounds bad using the words, "grab her by the P word," the statement never was an admission of rape. In fact, he said they let you do it, which means consent. To claim that women do not consent or allow rich or famous men to engage them sexually would just be a false statement. All you have to do is watch the groupies after rock concerts and sports events. So Trump rightfully called it locker room talk, and most men have engaged in rhetoric such as what was heard in the TMZ tape, and men use statements like, "I'd tap that all the time." I hope you aren't asleep after your eyes have been closed, but now you should really listen to this next part without including the left's biased and hateful rhetoric against Trump. Actually, replace Trump with someone like your spouse or brother. Now, not forgetting all the stuff we just went over. There was no surveillance video of any incident, no witnesses to the fact, no screaming or yelling stop. DNA wasn't allowed. No one knew the year or exact month of the alleged crime, no police report. And finally, she, in her own words in a New York Times interview, said there was no rape. It's true Jean Carroll's reputation was destroyed, but to claim Donald Trump defamed her reputation simply by denying the event happened, when there was no evidence the event did happen, makes the defamation verdict ridiculous. So while we all know this went to court and Trump lost, the lack of evidence and the circumstances surrounding what was allowed into evidence and what wasn't allowed, such as the DNA on the dress, the case should have never went to trial and litigated in front of an emotionally charged jury in New York. And coincidentally, the lawsuit was only able to proceed because Democrats created the Adult Survivors Act in 2022. She conveniently pursued this suit in November following the law going into effect, which allowed her to avoid the statute of limitations for this case. Anyone that really knows the facts surrounding the Jean Carroll case knows the case was not based on any evidence or facts, and it was more about smearing Donald Trump. But now that you know the facts, are you going to choose to remain ignorant and think to yourself, but I hate Trump, so it has to be true? Or are you going to understand that if you accept this verdict based on no evidence because you simply hate the orange man, you are okay with mob rule justice? The mindset becomes we all hate him and believe he committed the crime regardless of the evidence. It certainly sets a dangerous legal precedent, don't you think? There are plenty of reasons not to vote or like Donald Trump, but changing the fundamental spirit of the law just to destroy someone you hate is a really bad idea. Finally, to really show how this entire trial was just a smear campaign, especially through the media, you should take in consideration the judge's own words and actions, as well as the complete misrepresentation the media reported about the facts of the case. First, this was not a criminal trial, but a civil litigation for defamation. Jean Carroll accused Donald Trump of rape, and Trump denied the allegation. So, because of Trump's denial, Jean Carroll claimed Trump defamed her by denying he raped her. Do you know how ridiculous that sounds? Nonetheless, it wasn't a criminal trial for rape, but a civil litigation. In a real criminal trial, the evidence must be beyond any reasonable doubt, but in a civil litigation it is the vagueness of what's called the preponderance of evidence, which is a far less requirement. That means there was no rape trial at all, and even though Trump was found liable for defamation by denying he sexually assaulted Jean Carroll, the jury found he wasn't liable for defamation for denying he raped Jean Carroll. This is why it was such a massive lie when Judge Kaplan egregiously stated that what Trump basically did, according to the law, would be considered rape. It wasn't even a rape trial, nor was any evidence beyond any reasonable doubt required. His false statement immediately showed at the very least bias, but more important, a blatant corrupt smear campaign.